Back with you tonight. If you have your Bible, you know where we're going to be. 1 Samuel chapter 22. 1 Samuel chapter 22. We are progressing our way through the text, working our way through first, and we will, of course, get into 2 Samuel soon. We're working towards the end of First Samuel, and we're well over halfway there. We're at kind of an inflection point in some ways. Remember, David's life is very much an up and a down. At this point, right, he's killed Goliath. He's come before Saul. He is very much the chosen one, both by public perception and God himself it says that the Spirit of the Lord was taken away from Saul and given to David. And now Saul is getting progressively worse. I mean, in every capacity, more jealous, more angry, more fearful, and that's going to lead to a variety of rash decisions. One, again, we're going to see tonight. But at this point, in my eyes, one of the most beautiful kind of foreshadowings that we see, there's a lot of foreshadowing between David and Christ. One of them that I love happens here in chapter 22 because David is basically going to go on the run. I mean, he's been in that for a while, but now he's recognized, I can't go home, right? I can't go back to Samuel. I can't go worship. I can't go anywhere that Saul might know that I am. And so he's basically going to go to a cave. But the beauty of this is that God is going to utilize what's only going to really amount to a ragtag group of men. Not your your first round draft picks for David, but these are men for one reason or another that are called by God to come to this cave. Some of it's family, some of it is going to become, you've heard of David's mighty men, right? Uriah is going to become one of these. David is going to command this very small force that's going to be a pivotal part in his life, many of which trace back to this. And the beauty of this is you look at the foreshadowing, the parallels between God utilizing imperfect men to surround somebody to do a perfect plan, right? And of course, Jesus is perfect, but he's going to utilize imperfect men to come and begin the church and do all of his ministry. And David is far from imperfect, but is going to utilize a very similar thing. That's how God's going to lay this out. So let's read this together. It's only 23 verses, so we usually when we're in this time frame, we're a little shorter tonight, but we'll try to work our way and get as far through chapter 22 as we can. Saul, in my eyes, is going to commit perhaps one of his most heinous acts in chapter 22. Pure vengeance. It is bloodlust. It is complete. He's going to kill the priests. And even those that are going to serve Saul recognize the recklessness of this plan. There's only one person, we're going to read about this here in a moment, that is willing to go through with this. The entire priesthood, for the most part, is going to be killed except for one man that's going to come back, and David's going to hear about this. And so a lot going on here, but we're going to see David. Logan covered chapter 21 last week. Remember, David is going to flee from Gath, right? If you go back to chapter 21, and David rose and fled that day from Saul, and he's going to head towards Gath. So David, now we're back into 22, starting in verse 1. David departed from there and escaped to the cave at Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. Now we look at this, and again, he's going to depart from this, and David's been through a lot at this point, right? I mean, we can chronicle, we've went through this verse by verse. He's had highs of the immediate fame, right? He just recently got married. He has been in danger from the Philistines. He has killed Goliath. He's had repeated attempts on his life. But what is most heartbreaking is this farewell that he's had to make. Remember, just a couple chapters prior, he's making this covenant with Jonathan, recognizing life's never going to go back to normal, right? Either Saul's going to die and I'm eventually going to take over as king, or I'm going to die. There is no middle ground anymore. And that's an interesting realization for David, because he's gonna essentially bid farewell to everything that he's known. He's going to become this fugitive. And so David is going to have this really brief but intense. He's going to briefly backslide. We'll look at what that looks like in the text. But then he's going to really rally back to God. And in fact, a couple psalms that he's going to end up writing, at least one of them we know for sure he's going to write in this cave. But there's a couple psalms that David's going to write out of this period of his life. delivering, looking back to God. You know, this was not really a place of refuge necessarily. This was a place of survival. Remember, David couldn't go back to the palace. David couldn't go to Samuel. He couldn't go to Jonathan. He couldn't go to worship. He couldn't go anywhere. But he has this humble cave where he can survive. The name Adullam literally means refuge. But the interesting part about this is that God is not going to utilize the cave as the refuge. What God is going to train in the cave is going to be this almost visceral dependence on God, that there is nothing else but God alone that is going to keep David alive. And that's really true in a lot of ways. And that is going to, when we kind of laid out the opening themes of Samuel, I told you, one of the beautiful things that God does for David is that David is prepared on the run, in the caves, in the muck and the mire to be the king. That really parallels for you and me. God very much utilizes training us in our lowest to prepare us for something else down the road. That's David's story, and we see that over and over again. Most archaeologists are going to put this cave not too far from the valley where we know David defeated Goliath in the hills of Judah. And again, if you look in Psalm 142, we're going to look through a variety of psalms together. If we flip back to Psalm 142, you're going to see a variety of psalms that David wrote, and a few of them tell us kind of what period of his life he was in at that point. And 142, when I can get over there, we will see. So it says, a maskil of David when he was in the cave. Now listen to these first four verses, because again, most theologians will tell you that David wrote this in this moment. It very much lines up well, and there's not a whole lot of other points in David's life where all of this would have matched. But listen to what he wrote in the first four verses. With my voice, I cry out to the Lord. With my voice, I plead for mercy to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. When my spirit faints within me, you know my way. In the path where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see, there is none who takes notice of me. No refuge remains to me. No one cares for my soul. We'll go down one more. I cry to you, O Lord, I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Is that not haunting? In a beautiful way, that last line, what he's really saying is, Lord, you alone, your portion is the only thing that's keeping me in the land of the living. Basically saying, without you, God, I'm dead. But we also read in there that he's struggling with his position where he is. Again, it's describing David's discouragement, right? Pleading to God. And he says, Lord, I pour out my complaint before him. If you look in Psalm 57, right, this also is one that David wrote when he is fleeing from Saul into the cave. We won't read 57 for the sake of time, but read it at home, please. 57 is describing David as the Lord strengthening him in the cave. And really what's beautiful about 57 is David's recognition of the preparation of God in the midst of challenge. You know, you and I so often, and you've heard me say this before, don't waste a valley. That phrase is not unique to me. We've heard it said a variety of ways, but God often utilizes those valley moments to provide some of the most pivotal training and maturation for you and I as a Christian. David, for all his flaws, does a really good job of not wasting the valleys. Now, granted, I'm not sure that he would articulate it that way in the moment. I mean, he's still struggling. And he's going to continue to struggle in a lot of ways. But he's not resistant to what God's doing in his life. And that's really a challenge for you and me, because our instinct when we're in our cave is to turtle, right? To pull back and to show as little of our face as possible. I just got to get through it. Now, David has those moments. But David is also willing to be utilized by God. Psalm 57 is a beautiful description of this. If we read through this, again, it shows David's humility. Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me. Verse 2 says, I will cry out to God Most High, to God who performs all things for me. In the Hebrew, it literally means everything. Again, it is survival. It is, I am dependent at a molecular level on God to maintain and to stay the course. But then you read verses 4 and you read verse 6 and you recognize that David's got a very realistic understanding of things. My soul is among lions. He said something very similar in Psalm 142, but he writes, they have prepared a net for my steps. But he's trusting in God and is willing to praise him in spite of that. Again, we read down through this, go back to 1 Samuel 22. Verse 2 is interesting, and I hope that you'll consider this because, again, this is going to be the prep for a lot of the men that are going to be surrounding David when he's king. Right? You know, you've heard phrases, something to the effect of, you know, who's with me when I'm down is who will be with me when I'm on top. This is David's moment, right? Who's with me when I'm down? And what's interesting is that in spite of everything that his brothers and his dad has done or not done for him in his life, he wants family back in a lot of ways. Verse 2, and everyone who is in distress. Now listen to this descriptor. Again, you wonder where the parallel comes over to Christ. Listen to this. Everyone who is in distress, who was in debt, who was bitter in soul, gathered to him, and he became commander over them, and they were with him about 400 men. All his brothers and his father had heard what was going on, and they came down to David. Again, David's family is first, and this is really a precious gift that God has given him to even have this time. You know, again, David has been persecuted going all the way back, 1 Samuel 16 and 17, but they're now back together. And everyone who was there was in distress, was in debt, was discontent, was struggling. God called an unlikely and unique group to be with David. Did Christ himself not call a very similar group, not as big, but a similar group in heart and experience and background to be his inner circle? He called tax collectors. He called tent makers. He called the most unextraordinary group. There's a great book called 12 Ordinary Men that just chronicles the 12 closest men to Jesus, and we find that all of them were imperfect, flawed, average men that had one unique characteristic, which was their willingness and complete devotion to Christ. These men had that to David. They needed a leader, and David was willing to step in and be that. These men were in debt. They hadn't seen success. They were discontented. The word that gets translated there is the Hebrew word that means bitter of soul, bitterness of life. And all these men came to David when they were down and out. And these are the 400 that became the closest to David. He became their captain, right? This wasn't a mob. This was, and again, they would have, I think, followed David if he'd have pursued that route. If he'd have pursued I want to take this ragtag group and go start a coup and try to, kill Saul and take the throne, I think they'd have followed him. Certainly when we get a better inkling of what these 400 men become later on, we get a life or death devotion to David. Now that does come with time, but they seem bought in from the beginning. But that's not David's purpose. That's not what David's going to do. David is going to lead, but David understands that there is one God, and that one God has appointed him to be king of Israel, but only in his time. And again, that is one that I suggest to you, that is one of the greatest feats of David's life that we never attribute to him. That all this time he has the patience to wait and wait on God and wait on God and wait on God. God is going to utilize these men to help and David and going to contribute to David in one way or another. If you read in verses 3 and 4, we won't read this for the sake of time, but 3 and 4 is dealing with his parents. Right, please let my father and my mother stay. What's interesting is what it says is he's going to go from Mizpah of Moab Now, why would he go to Moab? But remember, go back to Ruth. Go back to David's lineage. David's family had Moabite in it. And so what David is saying here is, I know things are about to get hairy. I know I may die. I need to know my mom and dad are taken care of. I need to know they're protected. And so he takes them where they have lineage so that they will be watched after. And then David is going to return, right? And the prophet will go to, and he left them with the king of Moab, and they say, and stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. The stronghold is just another word for cave, right? So this was David sending his parents to be safe while he was going to take on everything that was going to happen next. If we jump down to verse 6. Again, we'll read this, and we're running short on time, but we'll read this because this is key to understanding the psyche of Saul. Again, he's going off the rails. He has been going off the rails for multiple chapters now, what amounts to a relatively short period of time, but 6 months worth since all of this really transpired. But now the priests are going to be killed at Saul's hands. David's going to have a small part in this, and David's going to feel super guilty, and in part is going to write another psalm because of, he didn't outright lie, but it was a lie of omission, and he's going to feel guilty over this. But Saul is really the culprit here. But let's read 6 through 8. When Saul heard that David was discovered. Now, remember, David is going to leave and is going to try to head back, and he's got 400 men with him. You can only hide that for so long, and they're going to be found out. So David is discovered, and the men who are with him, Saul was sitting at Gibeah under the tamarack tree on height with spear in his hand. Now, almost every usage of that phrase was spear in his hand, Saul's ready to kill. Everywhere we read about Saul, that exact phrase gets utilized with spear in hand. He's tried to kill David already multiple times with that exact phrase. We've read of him trying to kill others with that exact phrase. So we get a very clear understanding that Saul has kicked logic to the door. He has kicked mercy and intellect and anything else. He's ready for David to die and anybody that's with him. He's got spear in hand. And all his servants were standing about him. And Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, people of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards?" You know, it's interesting. I hope you'll underline that phrase, the son of Jesse. Probably the most disrespectful title that he could have given to David. He didn't say the man who killed Goliath or the man who slayed hundreds of Philistines, or the man who did fill in the blank. David's got a fairly impressive resume for being such a young man. But what made him an interesting pick to begin with was he was the son of a shepherd. He was the son of Jesse. He was the youngest son of Jesse. That's what he's going to say. Will the son of Jesse give every one of you? He's going to question these men. Is he going to give you fields and vineyards? Will he make you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? That all of you have conspired against me. No one discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as it is this day. Again, when David is just hiding, right? He could remain hidden for a long time, but you can't hide 400 men. It's almost impossible. Certainly, Saul, especially because Saul is actively looking for him, right? He's trying to find him. And Saul is going to get information back quickly. Will the son of Jesse do all of these things? He's appealing to the worst of these men, right? Is this man from Judah, from the tribe of Benjamin, is he going to give you riches? Is he going to give you promotions? Is he going to give you all the things that you want? But he also, again, all of you have conspired against me. There is not one who is sorry for me. You know, it's interesting. We've commented on this for multiple weeks that as the Spirit of the Lord left Saul, so did pretty much every discernible good characteristic of him as king. His courage, his leadership, his willingness to worship, his willingness to look for God for wisdom. But here we begin to see Saul is getting increasingly paranoid, and now, probably worst of all, is he's getting really whiny about it, right? He's whining, woe is me, why have you all sided with David, my own son, right? Again, some of this is paranoia, some of this is true, and that's the great struggle of reading through Saul right here, is you're not sure what's what, because his mind is out in its own space. Right, he has long kissed reality goodbye, and that's what's happening here. What he is going to give the order to kill these priests is more or less going to be false. Let's follow up with this. All that you have conspired against me, no one discloses to me when my own son, of course Jonathan, makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant again to lie and to wait. Then answered Doeg the Edomite. Now he's going to be a central player in all of this, for not in a good way. Who stood by the servants of Saul. I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob to Elimelech, the son of Atib. And he inquired of the Lord for him and gave him provisions and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. And the king sent to summon Amalek the priest, the son of Atib, to all his father's house. And the priests were at Nob, and all of them came to the king. And Saul said, hear me now. And he answered, here I am, Lord. And Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword and have inquired of God for him, that you have, so that he has risen up against me to lie in wait? And Elimelech answered the king, and all among all your servants is so faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law and the captain over your bodyguard and honored in your house. I feel really bad for him because he's trying to be honest, right? He's reporting things as he knows it. And not that long ago, David was the golden child. He's saying, Saul, I think you're misunderstanding. This is David. This is the one that married your daughter. This is the one who killed Goliath. This is the guy. But what's about to happen is Saul, all that he's hearing is fuel for David is greater, David is greater, David is greater. Everyone's got to die. And that's what Saul is going to do. He's going to demand it, but there's only going to be one man willing to do it. Is this not faithful David, who's the king's son-in-law and captain over your bodyguard? Is today the first time that I have inquired of God? No. Let not the king impute anything to his servant or to the house of my father, for your servant has said nothing of all of this, much or little. And the king said, you surely die, Elimelech, you and all your father's house. And the king said to the guard who stood by him, turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David. And they knew that he fled and did not disclose this to me. But the servants of the king would not put their hand to strike the priests of the Lord. And the king said to Doeg, you turn and strike the priest. And Doeg the Edomite turned and struck down the priest, and he killed on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod. And Nob, the city of the priest, he put to the sword both man and women, children, infant, ox, donkey, sheep, he put to the sword. But the sons of Elimelech, son of Atib, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And he told David that Saul had killed the priest of the Lord. And he said to Abiathar, I know on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he surely would tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons in your father's house. Stay with me. Do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you will be in safekeeping. Again, Doeg the Edomite is kind of the central figure here. We last saw him in chapter 21 and verse 7. Again, in the tabernacle, David was there. He had inquired of the Lord to give him provisions and gave him the sword of Goliath, but he implicated the priest as David's accomplice, right? That's not the case, but that's what he said. He was ambitious. He was looking to promote himself. And we look down all through this. And again, we see next week, read Psalm 52, right? Psalm 52 touches on this quite a bit. Psalm 52 points to this part of David's life. The title of it is A Contemplation of David with Doeg the Edomite. I mean, this is David pouring his heart out over this circumstance, right? Because David knows that at minimum, now he didn't order it, he didn't cause it necessarily, but he was in the mix, right? At very minimum, because he was on the run, these 80 some odd priests and their families died. And he feels, and again, what a great moment as a king. Even though he didn't cause it, he says, these are my people. I'm responsible. And this is going to be something he's going to deal with for a little bit, and he's going to write to, and he's going to lay his heart out to God. But as we end, here's 3 things that I see in Psalm 22. Number 1, and I've said this before, but this is a beautiful lesson of David. Oftentimes, God builds in the caves before he presents in the castle, right? He built David up. He will continue to build David up. And the great beauty of this is we're not talking about physical training. What we're talking about is stripping away everything that David could rely on and only giving him how he can rely on God, because that is going to be the tenor of his time as king. You will either live or you will die. You will succeed or you will fail based on your ability to yield to me, to God. And he's going to begin that training here. Leadership oftentimes means serving the broken. Again, you look around the men who gathered around David, who God called and appointed to be these men that are going to surround David. They weren't perfect. They weren't the strongest. But God picked them there because many times leadership, and David saw that. He says, you all need a leader, and I'm going to be that. Not for selfish gain, not to get a pat on the back, because he is a leader and knew that's what his position was. And lastly, obedience may cost you, but God will always honor it. That is going to be a consistent theme in David's life. Things will be asked of him. Right, Elimelech the priest helped David, not knowing Saul would kill him for it, but his obedience cost him his life. Now, the beauty of this is his integrity was later honored. Right, David is going to take one of his descendants and bring him in and honor that, as he's going to do with Jonathan. David is upstanding in almost every one of these ways. But choosing obedience to God, even when it's unpopular, when it's dangerous, our faithfulness today shapes church and faith tomorrow. The church that we worship in, the church our children will inherit, our grandchildren will inherit, will be based on the decisions we make now. Whether they're even involved in church will be because of decisions we make today. David is seeing this in full force. Tonight, if you aren't a Christian, we always want to extend the invitation that you might come and put on Christ in baptism. If we can help you with anything tonight, would you come let us know about it as we stand and as we sing together?